How's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of J.S. Bach's chorale harmonizations. Here we're looking at Wenn ich in Angst und Not, which translates to when I'm in fear and need. Fairly straightforward chorale. The majority of Bach's chorales that are in the key of E flat are straightforward, which is something that I've come to realize when just going back through my notes. But really not too much to write home about in this particular chorale. A couple of quirky tidbits that we'll cover when we get there, but we're just going to hop right into the analysis. So like I mentioned, we're in the key of E flat, 3 flats in the key signature. We start on E flat major and we end on E flat major. So those are 3 pretty aligned tells that we are in the key of E flat. Passing tones in the lower voices before we get G, B flat, E flat, and B flat, which is just taking our tonic triad and inverting it. No need to reiterate the Roman numeral. Passing tone here in the tenor before we get G, D flat, E flat, and B flat, which is E flat 7 over G. Otherwise, that's 5-6-5 of 4. Here we see the tonic operating as the dominant of the subdominant, which tells us basically where the chord's going to go next. A flat, C, E flat, and C, which is our 4 chord, A flat major. We have some passing tones in the lower voices here, which does give us a bit of a chord that we could analyze. We have G, B flat, E flat, and C, which is C minor 7 over G, which is kind of like a passing 6-4-3 chord. I don't really think it's too important in the grand scheme of things. I think that it's more of an incidental harmony. Sometimes when we see passing tones, you get a chord that you could analyze. In this case, I don't think it really imparts anything too important to the overall progression, because as we're getting ready for our perfect authentic cadence here, we do already have a predominant going to a dominant here, F, A, F, and D, which is A flat, D diminished over F, 7-6. And this 6 chord isn't really adding anything to the progression. And then that 7 chord takes us to our tonic, E flat, B flat, G, and E flat. Next phrase, we move to the key of B flat. Typically in chorales that are in the key of E flat, Bach often oscillates in between E flat and B flat. Those are the 2 most common chords that make appearances in chorales that end up being in the key of E flat major. Sometimes we see other keys as well, but a lot of the chorales we see E flat and B flat just moving back and forth. It's not a very common key, but we move pretty much immediately to the key of B flat. We start the phrase off with B flat. You could analyze this as a direct modulation as well, but I err more on the side of these being common chords than anything else. B flat, F and D, which is our 5 chord in the key of E flat, and our tonic triad in the key of B flat. It's B flat major. We then have C, A, C, and E flat, which is A diminished over C, 7-6. And typically what we would expect after this is a tonic triad in first inversion, but instead of getting a tonic triad in first inversion, we get something different. This B is also, or B flat rather, is also a 7-6 suspension over the bass. You could potentially analyze this as a 2-7 chord, but I err more on the side of this being a dominant triad that sort of morphs with the 7-6 suspension. We have G, B flat, and D. Definitely unusual for a 7-6 chord not to resolve to a tonic, so this is a bit of a deceptive progression, both in terms of the bass movement and in terms of the root movement as well. This is a G minor chord in root position, which is a 6 chord. 7 going to 6 is a relatively rare combination of chords that we see in succession. We don't see it all too often. 5 going to 6 is one thing, but 7 going to 6 is kind of unusual. But functionally speaking, 7 and 5 do the same thing, so it doesn't make, it makes complete sense. It doesn't not make sense is what I was about to say, but that's a double negative and would just confuse the point. Regardless, 6 takes us to, well, for starters, this D here is a chord tone, so we don't have to mark it. We then get E flat, B flat, G, and C. C minor 7 over E flat. We know that Bach loves 2-6-5 chords, especially in cadential contexts, and we would expect that to take us to 5, which it does. F, A natural from earlier in the measure, F and C. It's our 5 chord with the passing 7th on the alto, and then we cadence on B flat, F, D, and B flat. root position. Okay, next phrase takes us to the key of E flat again. That'd be interesting if we went to A flat from B flat. That'd be a distant modulation. Haven't seen one of those in a while. This is a half cadence, but even though we're cadencing on a B flat chord, we're in the key of E flat. No chromaticism in this phrase. So we start off with E flat major over G, G, B flat, E flat, and B flat, which is our 4-chord in first inversion. It also happens to be our tonic triad in first inversion in the key of E flat. And then we get A flat, A flat. This B flat's probably a 9/8 suspension over the bass. E flat and C. It's much more common to see 9/8 suspensions over tonic triads in root position, but here we see a 9/8 suspension over a 4-chord, A flat major. It's kind of interesting. E flat is the dominant to A flat, so maybe A flat is being tonicized here, but we don't have a dominant 7 in this chord, so we don't know if it's operating like a secondary dominant or if it's operating purely as a tonic. But afterwards we get B flat, G, D, and B flat. This A, I'm pretty convinced, is another 7/6 suspension. It looks like we have a series of suspensions going on here in the tenor. If this this G were our chord tone, this would be a G minor over B flat, which is a 3/6 chord. And we see the start of a pattern that we see relatively commonly in Bach with a triad, a diatonic step below in first inversion, and then we typically would expect the same Roman numeral or same root as the first chord in the progression in first inversion, and I think we get that. We have C, G, E flat, and A flat, so we do get a 4/6 chord, but it also has a 7th, so it's a 4/6/5 chord. So we have a pretty interesting progression here. That's a variation on the more common 1-7-6-1-6 progression that we see in Bach and his chorales all the time. But afterwards we have a D, which is a non-chord tone, F, which is a non-chord tone, and B flat, which is also a non-chord tone. And when we take the aggregate of all the tones happening off of the beat, we have B flat 7, which is 5/6-5. It's a very common sequence or progression that we see in Bach. And then we would expect our tonic after that, which we get E flat, B flat, and G. This F is a 9/8 suspension over our bass. Here's a 9/8 suspension over a tonic triad. These are much more common than we see 9/8 suspensions over other triads, but more recently than not, we've been seeing some movement away from the 9/8 suspension being more like pretty much unanimously associated with tonic triads, which has been kind of interesting. But our half cadence ends with a 5-chord. That's what a half cadence is. So B flat, D, B flat, and F. Fairly straightforward. And for the next phrase, Bach stays in the key of E flat major. We end in an imperfect authentic cadence. We start off with a secondary dominant here, though. We have B natural, G, D, and G, which is G major over B. That's 5/6 of 6 because G is the dominant of C, and C is our 6th chord. We get kind of a similar possible tonicization here, which might bring to life the fact that this E flat chord maybe is a secondary dominant, but because it's diatonic to the key that we're currently in, it's difficult to say for sure. But yeah, in this case, E flat is being used as a common chord to move back to E flat, whereas now we're currently in the key of E flat. But our tonicized chord does have a 9/8 suspension in it, so the tonic is functioning or has the suspension in the usual way that we would expect to see it. We have C, G, C, and E flat, which is our 6th chord, C minor. We then have D, F, B flat, and F, another 7/6 suspension here, where we have B flat major over D, which is a 5/6 chord, and we see the beginning of a potential chord progression. That's something that we might be reminded of from the previous phrase. 4-3-6-4-6. Here we have 6-5-6, maybe 6-6. We have C, E flat, B flat, and G. So no, we don't get that. No, we have E flat, B flat, and G. So we don't get it exactly. The potential is there, but instead of getting C, we get B flat, which gives us a tonic triad. The chord progressions are very similar when you look at their contents, but the roots are different than what we would particularly expect. But regardless, we're moving towards our imperfect authentic cadence. We have a respelling of the same chord. G, B flat, E, and B flat. That's just inverting our chord. We don't need to reiterate the Roman numeral. And then we get F, C, E flat, and A, which is our 5 chord. Sorry, not our 5 chord. We are no longer in the key of B flat, and that is an A flat, not an A natural. So this would be a 2-7 chord in root position. F minor 7. Bach loves 2-6-5 chords usually in cadential situations, but sometimes we see root position 2-7 chords in imperfect authentic cadences especially. So in this case, F and E flat are both chord tones. We don't have to mark them. Then we get an incomplete 5-7 chord here, B flat, D, and A. We often get 2-7 and 5-7 paired together because they share that A flat, or they share that tone in common. And then we get our tonic triad, E flat, B flat, E flat, and G. E flat major in root position. Okay, so moving into the next phrase, we get another movement back to the key of B flat. We get another perfect authentic cadence, and we know that we're moving to the key of B flat, namely because we get A naturals throughout the entirety of the phrase, just visually looking at the melody, or just the voices and their melodic content. We start the phrase off with B flat, D, F, and D, which is a B flat major chord, which is 5 in the key of E flat. It also happens to be 1 in the key of B flat. And then we get B flat, C, G, and E flat. C minor 7 over B flat, 2-4-2. Typically this resolves to 5-6, or even more specifically 5-6-5 in this case, which it does. A, C, F, and E flat. F7 over A. And then that takes us to our tonic B flat major, B flat, F, and D. We then get E flat, B flat, G, and C, another C minor 7 chord, this time in first inversion. We know that Bach loves 2-6-5 chords, especially in cadential contexts. And then we get our 5 chord afterwards, which we would typically expect after a 2-6-5 chord especially, F, A, F, and C. Passing 7th in the alto. Come to think of it, this actually looks very similar to the phrase that we had in the first system. Very similar in terms of pitch content, not exactly, but similar. And then the phrase ends with our tonic triad, B flat, F, D, and B flat. And then the longest phrase of the chorale is our ultimate phrase, ends in a perfect authentic cadence in the key of B flat, in the key of E flat. And we get a modulation at the very beginning. At least I'm convinced that the chorale starts in the key of E flat. We see C, C, G, and E flat, which is 2 in the key of B flat major and 6 in the key of E flat major. We then get G, B flat, G, and D. The C, I think, is a 4-3 suspension over the bass. Doesn't leave us with an analyzable triad using Bach's harmonic vocabulary, that is, or the chord progressions that we would expect from Bach, at least. Probably not some type of sus chord. Well, actually, I guess the resulting chord is a sus chord, but it resolves, so I feel like this is the implied chord here, which is G minor in root position, so this is an example of what I've called a transitive progression in the past, because typically 3 wants to go to 6. The cycle of falling fifths is usually the direction that the normative chord progressions go in tonal music, especially music of Bach's time. But here we see 6 going to 3, which just goes to show that the same voice leading can take you in either direction. It's more the relationship between the roots that's more important than the direction. Then we go to A flat major, A flat, E flat, and C. I think this B flat's another 7-6 suspension. We've seen this 9-8, we've seen this chain of suspensions here. In this case, it's a 4-3 to a 7-6, but we've seen series of chains of suspensions, especially in the tenor. In this particular chorale, this A flat chord is our 4 chord. And then we get E flat, G, E flat, and B flat, another 4-3 suspension, this time over our tonic, which is kind of interesting. And also, another interesting note is that this chord progression consists of chords that are all in root position, which is relatively rare. We usually see less movement in the bass, and chords are usually inverted. But afterwards, we get C, G, E flat, and C. C minor in root position, which is our 6th chord in the key of E flat. And then we get D, D, F, and B flat, which is B flat major over D. It's our 6th chord, or 5th chord in first inversion. And then we get E natural, C, G, and B flat. This is actually a very interesting progression because if this E natural were an E flat, we'd have a 6-5-6, 6-6-5 progression, but instead what we have here is 5-6-5 of 2, which is the dominant of F minor, and it's just a substitute for 6, just by virtue of the fact that the quality of the triad changes. But hidden in the Roman numerals is actually a progression that is a variation on this 1-7-6-1-6 progression that we've seen quite a few times in Bach, and we've also seen other variations of this progression in this particular chorale as well with the 4-3-6-4-6. So I thought that was a pretty nifty progression, probably my favorite part of the chorale. But we would expect this chord to resolve to 2, F, C, G, and A flat, this G being a 9/8 suspension over our temporary tonic, our tonicized chord. And then we go to C, C, F, and G. Kind of like a, we have a 4-3 suspension over the bass here, and because this F is a non-chord tone, this G is most likely a non-chord tone too. So we actually have A flat major over C. So kind of an interesting chord progression here. 4-6. Yeah, typically we don't see chords that are a third apart, especially going up. So like 2 going to 4, a bit of a rare progression, but I think the fact that the 6 is in the bass kind of makes this almost like a transitive progression, like 4-6 is operating like a substitute for 6. But even beyond that, usually there's some type of buffer tone that separates chords that are a third apart, like even in this case between 1 and 6, there's a tone that separates them, even though it is an anticipation, but here we have tones separating the two chords here in the form of the suspension. Afterwards we get G, B flat, E flat, and B flat, which is our tonic triad in first inversion, E flat major, and then we get C, E flat, and A, another 4-6 chord, A flat major, passing tone in the tenor before we get B flat, G, E flat, and G, which is just taking our tonic triad. Actually, no, we weren't preceded by a tonic triad. Sorry, my brain just skipped that chord there. This is our tonic triad in second inversion, and we would typically expect that to go to 5. This E flat's also a chord tone, so we don't have to mark it, but in this case we have an example of an interrupted 1-6-4-5 progression, and usually the chord that we get that interrupts the progression is a 2-6-5 chord, which coincidentally is this chord as well. A flat, C, E flat, and F, 2-6-5, and then we typically expect a 5 chord like a delayed resolution, B flat, D, and F. And what I've been kind of cheekily been using to create the relationship, but because it's broken, I'll use a dashed bracket, which is kind of interesting. I just felt intuitive to do. I don't know if other people do that or if there is a convention to talk about interrupted 1-6-4-5 progressions, but here's how I articulate it on the page. We have a passing seventh in the tenor as well before we get E flat, G, B flat, and E flat, which is our tonic triad in root position. And that is today's analysis. Just thinking about the takeaways from today's chorale, we have the 4-3-6-4-6 progression, or 4-6-5, but really what matters is that it's 4 in first inversion. We have this 6-5-6, 5-6-5 of 2, which is basically just a 6-6 progression, 6-6 chord as well. We have a 5-6, or just a 5 of 4 here, when the tonic turns into the dominant of the subdominant. I think that that's very interesting and imparts a unique sound on the harmony more so than other secondary dominants. And we also have an interrupted 1-6-4-5 progression, which we just talked about, so it's fresher than the other talking points or memorable parts of this chorale's profile. So other than that, this chorale is very straightforward to analyze, and I think I'm going to cap the video off on those thoughts. So if you're interested in following me along on the journey to analyze all of Bach's chorale harmonizations, feel free to subscribe to the channel. You can hit the notification icon and like the video as well if you enjoyed the content. Thank you so much for watching the video and supporting the channel by doing so. I look forward to tomorrow's analysis, and I hope you take care.